intuition would imply that I would have a direct connection with God on some level, or direct connection with spirit. And the tradition I grew up in, or that I follow, or the religion that I adhere to, says that I don't have a direct connection with God, that I have to go through a preacher or a minister or a shaman or anything. And my only way to get to God is through someone else. And so it must not be available to me to have a direct relationship with the divine. Well, I'll tell you right now, that's not true.
You are listening to Personal Development Mastery Podcast, providing those with the desire to grow with the simple, consistent actions needed to master personal development and create the life they yearn for. I'm your host, 𝘁Ᾰ𝗄𝘆𝘀. A few years ago, I found myself unfulfilled and unmotivated, like I had lost my sense of purpose and my life was merely passing by. Since then, I've been on a continuous journey of personal development that has transformed every aspect of my life. Now, my mission is to inspire you to grow, stand out, and take action towards a purposeful and fulfilling life. In this podcast, I invite myself inside the minds of remarkable entrepreneurs, authors, thought leaders, spiritual teachers, people who share their journey, milestones, and learnings for you to be inspired to grow. In each episode, you will find practical action points that you can implement right now. So make sure you follow the podcast to get them as soon as they are released. Would you like to strengthen your intuition? Do you want to understand the difference between the voice of ego and the voice of intuition? If your answer is yes, then today's episode is for you. Let's dive in. In today's show, I am delighted to be joined by Jamie Thornhill. Jamie, you are an intuitive medium with over 10 years of professional experience and the co-founder of Casa Galactica in Peru, where, along with your husband Michael, you help people activate their intuition, empower their healing, and embody their truth. You specifically delight in working with dedicated inner truth seekers, purpose-driven healers, and soul-inspired entrepreneurs who desire to know, embrace, and live their highest calling within this very human experience on planet Earth. Jamie, welcome to the show. It's such a pleasure to speak with you today.
𝘁, thank you so much. It's so funny, as you were giving me that intro, I was getting chills and inwardly thinking, yes, all of that. So thank you. Yes, it's great to be here.
It's beautiful. And, I was reading what it's sometimes it is interesting when we hear some things about us that others say, even though it is about us. I will share and I will start actually with this, that I had a conversation with your husband, Michael, who I mentioned in the introduction a few months ago. It was in episode 266. And we had a truly fascinating conversation. And then the idea came to speak with you as well. And I was very excited, especially knowing the topic that you wanted to discuss, which is our intuition and how to strengthen our intuition. So yeah, I'm delighted and excited to have you today. Before we discuss the intuition, which is an amazing topic, I would like to start with a little bit of background. So I spoke briefly in the introduction about you, but I would like you to take us back before all this happened. Before all this started, what was the turning point to change you into the person and doing what you are doing today?
𝘁, that is a great question, and one of my favorite questions to ask anyone, really, because it's so interesting. And I say interesting because many of us just naturally growing up, especially as kids, we come into this world just innately tuned into and aware of our own instincts, our own intuition. We're very sensitive and receptive to energy in the non-physical realm. And then we grow up in our families or in our communities communities or in our countries, whatever that is, and we may not be supported or encouraged in our energetic connections or receptivity to our own knowings. And so sometimes humans have a tendency to kind of put blinders on, or sort of consciously or unconsciously step away from or remove themselves from their own intuition. And that's pretty normal in this human lifetime and incarnations, especially what I would call on third density, planet Earth, whatever we want to refer to it as, where there's sort of a thick experience of separation from that intuition. But even that being said, it's always there. It's always completely intact. It always exists. And for me, quickly, when I was a kid, the thing I remember the most is plants. I just loved plants. And my great grandmother's garden, when we would go over there, she would tell us to go in the backyard and pick from the vegetables and bring something in, and she would cook for us. So I can remember being 5 years old and running through her garden, and the tomatoes telling me, pick me, and the okra saying, pick me. So I was very receptive to the plants sort of having a personality and talking to me. And then as I got a little bit older, into my maybe like 8, 9, 10 years old, excuse me, I would go out into the field by my house in our neighborhood in this untouched prairie, and the grasses were about 1.5 meters tall. And I would go out and sit in the middle of them and lay down in the grasses. And it was pretty windy in Oklahoma in the United States where I grew up. And so those grasses would be sort of wafting in the wind and bouncing around. And they would literally be tickling me and laughing with me. And they were so happy that I was out there. So when I was a kid, I was very aware of plants having spirit. And I was very tuned into energy of places and rooms. And I can remember I would walk into a house and I would feel like, I love this place, or I would feel like, oof, I don't like this place, and just really sensitive and knew it. Now, the short part of this is that as a kid, I experienced some abuse and some trauma. And in those experiences, not only was there a physical violation going on, but oftentimes with those physical violations, there's an energetic or spiritual element or presence of energies that are there too. And because I was sensitive to the energetic experience of those traumas, I shut down. I didn't want to see that and experience that again. So as a kid, somewhere around 8, 9, 10, I closed off myself from my intuition very consciously for survival purposes. And, again, this is something when I work with clients and students, this too is very common, that we have a tendency out of a trauma response and out of survival and wanting to be safe, we just kind of cut ourselves off from paying attention to these things. Now, in my 30s, in 2009, 2010, I had as an adult what I would call kind of a bottoming out experience, where a very long-term relationship had ended. I lost my job. I was losing interest in everything. I didn't really know what to do. I was kind of at a place where I was down on my knees, and all that I could think of to do was to pray. And I wasn't a religious person, and at that time I wasn't a spiritual person. And I didn't have a conscious connection to anything that I was aware of. But at my wit's end, I just thought, I'm going to try to pray. We'll see what happens. And so in 2010, I started praying, and I went into a 12-step program. And within that, had a lot of support from peers in making a connection with a higher power, even though I had no idea what I was up to and what I was doing or what it would do or what it would mean to me. And in that practice of praying every day, just out of survival, again, of like, holy smokes, how do I get out of this? How do I change my life? What do I need to do differently? As I started praying, I started being aware of that I was actually receiving guidance, and pretty clear guidance, and guidance that I'll tell you I could not have dreamt up at the time. I didn't have the capacity. I wasn't at that level of understanding or openness or expansiveness. And I started taking a lot of notes on what I was receiving in prayer time. And it probably took me about 6 to 12 months to recognize I'm actually receiving guidance when I pray. When I ask for something, there's always a response. And then I started recognizing when I would sit with friends who were having difficult times, and I've always been a really good listener. And when friends would talk to me about tough things, I don't know what decision to make in regards to my relationship, that same guidance wanted to come through for them. And I would feel it, and I would think, this is so weird because it's not coming from my brain. It's not something I'm thinking about. I'm feeling like it's information that wants to come through out of love for this person. And so I started honoring that. And it was a little uncomfortable at first, but for instance, my best friend, she's always up for, whatever ride I take us on. And, I mentioned to her one time when she was talking to me, I said, I think there's some guidance coming through for you. And this is kind of connected to the prayer I've been telling you about. And she's like, yes, I'm in. What are we doing? How do we do this? I said, well, let me just start telling you what I'm hearing or feeling, and we'll just see how this goes. And so she sat with me and I shared some things with her, and she was just like, this is great. She was like, it feels so much lighter. Thank you so much. And then it just started happening more regularly, where the guidance wasn't just for me, it was for anyone, it's for everyone. And then it really humbled me, and I get emotional when I think about it, because what I began to recognize, and what I know with such a strong conviction to this day, that the guidance, the wisdom, the love, the support, the encouragement is here. It exists for us all at every moment. It's always intact. It's always flowing. It's an infinite wellspring. It's always wanting to douse us with love and intelligence and wisdom and guidance. It never needs anything from us. It's always here and always with us, always for us. Whether we're conscious of it or not, whether we put our attention towards it or not, it still loves us so much. And it's never not been there. And so that just always touches my heart. And so at some point in there, when I started doing this with friends, I felt myself, there was an inner invitation of, am I willing or ready or interested in recognizing that this can be beneficial for people on a regular basis? And that if I am ready to do that, it would require me to be open, honest, direct, clear, transparent about this being the work that I do. And it was like, what are people going to think? I grew up in Oklahoma, and we're supposed to be putting on we're supposed to be putting on some appearances for people. So it also invited me to go in and say, this is more important than any appearance I would ever want to try to portray or perform. And this love and intelligence and wisdom is more powerful than anything. And so at some point I made the conscious decision, I'm doing this. I'm doing it openly. I'm doing it publicly. I'm doing it professionally. I'm going to practice at it. I'm going to get good at it. I'm going to refine it. I'm going to hone my practice. I'm going to improve my integrity. And that was around 2010 to 2012 when that happened.
That's an incredible story. Thank you for sharing some of the highlights there. There was something that I really wanted to ask you when you were saying about receiving guidance when you were during your prayers, like a response to your asking. You were asking and you would receive the guidance. And you said that you knew that it was not coming from your brain. So what I want to ask is, in what way was that guidance different than, when we sit down and ask for something, let's say, and we have an idea that appears. So in what way, how did you know that it was receiving guidance in the way that you described it?
Great question, Augie. And this is important for anyone listening. We all receive guidance very uniquely. And so even as I begin to answer the question that you have asked me, I want to be very clear to anyone listening. This is how it works for me. It may or may not work for someone else like this. And so that's important, because what happens is our ego sometimes gets involved and will say, Well, Jamie just said this is how it works for her, and it doesn't work like that for me. So I must not be intuitive. That's ego's favorite line. And I just want to speak to ego of anybody, all of us right now, before I even answer this question, that's not what's happening. There's a myriad of ways that we receive information. But I can tell you, Augie, for me, at that point, I was literally receiving words. Like I would sit there with my journal and basically kind of inwardly listen and receive words and write the words down without thinking. And then I would say to myself, because again, I've always been creative. I've always been artistic. I've always been a designer. And so these things are a little bit more in my flow of like, sure, I'll just go with whatever's happening. We'll see what happens because that's fun for me. So I just would write down without thinking whatever was coming through, and I set it to the side, and then I would look at it 20 minutes later or a day later, and I would read it, and I would be like, I cannot write that. And it would be specifically like, here's something, just a sentence. And I remember I took a marker and wrote this on my bathroom window so that I would remember it, because I thought there's something in this. But one of the voices, or my guides, now I know it as a guide. At that time, I thought it was God speaking to me, which is also a reflection of a guide. But my guide said, spirit flows through you. You breathe spirit. And I just, even when I say that now, I'm just like, oh my gosh. So my guide kept saying that over and over, spirit flows through you. You breathe spirit. And it just was like, whoa, okay, what does that mean? And my guide kept saying, say that inwardly and feel it. So spirit flows through you. Spirit flows through you. Well, I could feel that. It meant that it's always moving through me. It's always there. It's not impeded. It can't be stopped. It's effortless. It's innate to who I am. And then I breathe spirit is the same as saying spirit is my life force. Spirit is my breath. I'm breathing it. We're breathing it. Again, I want to be clear. The ego right now of anybody is saying, oh, well, Jamie breathes spirit. Not me, though. No, you guys, and I'm speaking to everyone's ego, we all breathe spirit. Spirit flows through all of us. And again, whether we're conscious of it or recognize it or not, it's there doing it incessantly. And so that's a very specific phrase or thing that was said to me that I wrote down that to this day stays with me as just like an inner truth. Like I feel into it and I'm like, that's true. Now at that point in time, and I'll even giggle and say maybe even today, but definitely at that point in time, I would not have been able to come up with that, nor had any idea what that even meant. Mm-hmm. And I was aware of that.
Thank you. That's as a message, the way you were saying that spirit flows through me and I breathe spirit. It's very powerful, even to ponder on it and what possibly could it mean. You said. And I'm going to switch gears a bit and actually talk about this. You said earlier that everyone is intuitive. So I would like to speak about that. And there is, you said that everyone has already intuition and it's a matter of strengthening. So I would like to discuss this topic with you. And you already mentioned some things about it, but if we were to go through those steps that you describe of someone that wants to enhance, to strengthen their intuition, can we go through those steps one by one? Because I think it's very useful, important, practical, and I hope that the listener can really pick one or two things out of this that they can really make a big difference.
Yeah, absolutely, Augie. Thank you. So, one of my favorite things to do, and you and I have spoke about this, is I love encouraging, supporting, teaching, holding space for leading workshops for people who are ready to step into the recognition of their intuition and their inner authority. I just love doing that so much. And one of the offerings I have is an Intuitive Mentorship 101 course, which is a 6-session private course that basically are the foundational tools for not learning how to be intuitive, but learning how to strengthen intuition through the direct experience of recognizing that it already exists. And so in efforts to sort of help people step into that on their own, whether you do a course with me or someone else or don't do a course at all, in this moment on this podcast, there are 5 what I call easy steps that we can use to begin to strengthen our own recognition that our intuition already exists. So I'll say it again to anyone listening. Your intuition already exists. You're already every day working with and utilizing your intuition to make decisions, even down to deciding what to eat, whether it has to do with your personal life, your work life. Everyone, all of us, all of you are behaving and acting from and engaging in intuitive ways on the daily basis. Again, whether you're conscious of it or not is just fine. It's still happening fluently. Now, so really, all I want to do is share a few things that help us recognize that. And in recognizing that, we're able to strengthen it. So the first thing I would say, Augie, is become aware of or recognize any of your limiting beliefs around intuition. Now, I can tell you there's sometimes if you live in a certain area of the planet, you come from a specific culture, you grow up in a certain family, or you grow up with a certain religion or tradition. There can be beliefs about intuition that are uplifting or sort of downtrodden, or anywhere in between. And so some of those limiting beliefs about intuition might be, oh, intuition is something that's only given to special people, gifted people. I hear this a lot. People are like, you're so gifted. And I'm like, no, we're all, if I'm gifted, we're all gifted. So everybody's gifted, if we want to call it that, or we can just say it's natural for everybody. So that's one example of a limiting belief. Another limiting belief could be that, well, intuition would imply that I would have a direct connection with God on some level, or direct connection with spirit. And the tradition I grew up in, or that I follow, or the religion that I adhere to, says that I don't have a direct connection with God, that I have to go through a preacher or a minister or a shaman or anything. And my only way to get to God is through someone else. And so it must not be available to me to have a direct relationship with the divine. Well, I'll tell you right now, that's not true. But that is a limiting belief out there that keeps some of us from thinking or recognizing or even being privy to that, oh, I get to have a direct connection with God, source, higher power, the one infinite loving intelligence, whatever that word or phrase is that any of us has. The other thing, this is a big one, and this can stem from emotional, spiritual abuse or trauma, that intuition is evil, that it's unsafe, that it can't be trusted, that people use it for bad things. Now, here's the thing. Everybody is intuitive. Everyone's already intuitive. The way we work with that or don't work with that is our choice. If we want to work with it in ways that are in service to others, in service to love, in service to unity, in service to oneness, then we may. We can also work with and use intuition for maybe not so great reasons or purposes. But what I would say is that doesn't mean that intuition in general or overall is negative, or that it's bad, or that it's unsafe, or that it can't be trusted. And so what that belief, that limiting belief does is we tend to internalize it then and say, I must be evil. I must be bad. I must be unsafe because I'm feeling or sensing intuitively very often, or often I make decisions based on my intuition, but I'm not going to say that or acknowledge it because I think people might be afraid of me or think I'm bad. So I just want to speak to that too, because that's a big collective trauma that's out there. I'm going to say energetically, mentally, spiritually, that's a big trauma. And I just want to speak to that and say, you, me, we are lovingly sourced with this interconnection that sustains us infinitely, indefinitely, and that it's from love, it's from truth, and it's from that deep collective wisdom that we're all connected to. So that's the first thing, Augie, that I would say. A second, and Augie, let me just check in here. I've got a few more that I'll mention, but do you have any questions about that, or is that
no questions.
sorry?
It is very clear, and I liked the way you explain it. I think it's foundational to understand some things, some of our beliefs that may be blocking our access to intuition. And you gave some wonderful examples. So let's move on to the next. I think this is one very clear, and it allows the next ones to evolve from there, I think.
Okay, great. Well, so another step you can take right here, right now, everybody listening, is simply challenge your self-doubt. Self-doubt, basically, here's the tip, or here's the hint. Self-doubt and skepticism, they're always the function of ego. And ego is a great tool that we have in this human incarnation that assists us, I'd like to say, kind of as I perceive it, assists us in thriving and staying alive and being very connected to the physical experience, keeping track of our bodies, making sure we're moving around, keeping ourselves safe, collecting all of our experiences, helping us remember, oh, last time I touched the stove, I burned my hand. I'm not going to do that again. So the ego has many beneficial purposes for us. Sometimes the ego gets a bad rap, and that's fine. It has some things it does that kind of keep us from our own inner authority. And I'll mention that here right now. But basically, something we can always know is that self-doubt and skepticism, they're the function of the ego. And it's the job of the ego to doubt things until it's experienced them and recognize that it's worked and everything's turned out okay. All right? Because that's the other thing. So what ego's going to say about intuition, ego's going to go, I see that you just had an instinct in making a decision about your business. Well, have you done the pros and cons? Have you researched this? Have you done the financial strategizing? And then your intuition's going to say, I don't need to do all that. I just know this is the right decision to make, and we'll continue forward. And ego will say, I wouldn't do that. People aren't going to like it. Someone's going to get upset. You could lose your business entirely. And then intuition's going to go, I know this is the right decision. I can feel it in my gut. This is the direction. This is the only thing that feels like it wants to move forward. And ego's going to say, well, we don't really have any proof of that. How do you know that's true? This isn't very rational. And then, say in this instance, you decide, all right, I'm going to go ahead and trust my intuition, and I'm going to make this decision towards my business. And you make that step, and lo and behold, there you are. It's moved some things. All of a sudden, you've got these new clients. You're doing more work that you love doing. It's opened you up to other opportunities. And ego then says, oh, wow, that worked. And ego steps up and meets you now at the new experience. Ego might even, this cracks me up about ego might even start taking credit for it. Ego would be like, did you see what happened when we followed our intuition? We're really good at this. And so, ego can just be recognized that any of that skepticism, any of that self-doubt, that's ego speaking. And so one thing we can say when we feel, Augie, you and I spoke earlier, and you use the language that when you feel something intuitively, it feels like a knowing. Like, I just know this is the right topic to discuss, or I just know this is the right decision to make. And I just go ahead and do it, and I don't rationalize it. So one of the things we can do like for instance, if any of you out there have that same experience where you get knowings, where you just know something, you just feel it. Some people say, oh, I feel it in my gut. Some people say, oh, I just felt it in my heart. Everyone has different ways of knowing it or feeling it. Now, when the voice of ego steps in and says, I don't know, guys, bad idea. Someone's not going to like us if we do this. This isn't really an intuitive decision. I wouldn't follow this. You're just being silly. We can just ask ourselves, we can be like, thank you so much, ego. I recognize that you're skeptical and you have self-doubt, and I appreciate that. You keep me very safe. Appreciate it. Now, in this moment, we can ask ourselves one of these questions, can say, is it absolutely true that I'm not intuitive? Is it absolutely true that I'm not intuitive? And if it's not absolutely true, then how am I experiencing my intuition right now? Well, I'm feeling a knowing in my heart. Okay. So it's kind of like this recognizing the self-doubt and the skepticism and questioning it. Another question we can ask ourselves, okay, thanks so much, ego. I realize that you're concerned about this. We can ask ourselves, if I was being intuitively guided right now, what would my intuition say about this decision? What would my intuition say about this decision? We can also ask, what would my ego say about this intuition? I can tell you what my ego would say, and my ego is very present with me all the time. If I was like, what would my ego say about this decision with my work? My ego would say, you know what happened last time you did this? And then I wouldn't do it. It's a waste of time and energy. No one's going to like it. Well, that's not intuitive guidance. That's my ego speaking. And so I just get to recognize again, that's what my ego always says. Thank you so much, ego. Now, one other helpful question you might ask yourself is, what do I imagine my intuition might have to say about this? Because sometimes people think or feel, oh, I'm not intuitive. Well, imagine you're intuitive. Imagine you're intuitive. What would you imagine your intuition would say about this decision right now? So these are just some easy questions that you can ask to help counter or have a contrast of that self-doubt and skepticism from ego. Now, this also leads into just recognizing these are simple things that, sometimes the ego wants to presume to be a little bit more mysterious than it actually is. The ego is not mysterious. Anyone's ego, my ego, your ego, our egos, they're pretty obvious. All right. So step number 3 would just be, a continuation of acknowledge your ego's voice. Begin to recognize and acknowledge your ego's voice, because in all truth and honesty, the ego and the voice of intuition are distinctly different. They're not close at all. And so it's not confusing and it's not mysterious. It's like, oh my gosh, sometimes I work with students and clients who will say, I can't tell if this is actually my intuition or if it's just my ego talking right now. And I always say, well, let's tune into the energy of it, the vibe of it. What are the words that it's saying? How does it feel? Because you'll know very quickly if it's intuition or ego. And let me just list a few things that are, when I mention them, they'll sound pretty obvious and you'll kind of feel them pretty quickly. The ego, when it's speaking to us or when it's having it say, it's often fear-based. It's afraid of what's going to happen. It's just afraid of what's going to happen. It's afraid of the outcome, afraid of the results. It's doubtful. It's not sure something's going to work. It's skeptical of the way something's being done. It has a tendency to make itself superior or inferior. It's never on equal footing with anything. It's always wanting to position itself as better than, or it's wanting to feel like it's less than and inferior. Oh, I'm not special. I'm not gifted. I'm not intuitive. Or, oh, look at me. I used my intuition. I'm better than most people. It's so funny. It makes me laugh. But And then also the ego often wants an explanation, justification, wants a pros and con list, wants to rationalize it, wants to do research, wants to find out the pros and the cons. And it's fine. That's ego's job. Ego often perceives scarcity or experiences lack. Oh, there's not going to be enough. Oh, this is going to end poorly. Oh, we're not going to be resourced. Oh, this is going to result in us losing money or us losing work or us losing clients. And ego is also very, I want to say, sort of contractive or limited. It tends to want to stay within the parameters of what it knows. Okay, so that gives a pretty clear picture of ego that if you're listening, you may be able to feel. And again, I want to say this, the ego is not good or bad. We're not trying to get rid of the ego. We're not trying to ascend to a place beyond the ego. We're just trying to become aware of the ego and recognize its voice. And we're just trying to allow it to be present without needing anything from it. Now, alternatively, recognizing the voice of intuition. Intuition is love-based. And not just love for you. The love for you is for everybody. Love recognizes love itself, whether it stems from someone or goes out to someone, is actually for everybody. And so intuition's very love-based. It includes everything out into eternity. It includes everything. There's no limits. The voice of intuition is trusting, is knowing. It doesn't need an explanation. It doesn't need a bullet point list. It doesn't need to go research something to back it up. The voice of intuition is just knowing. That's why, Augie, when you said that, you used that word that, oh, I always just kind of know the direction that feels like it wants to go. That's one of my favorite ways of intuiting. And there are many ways to intuit, everybody, but that's one of my favorite because you can just feel it and respond to it. And there's no words or visions or anything to sort of get distracted by. It's just a sense, and it's immediate and it's instinctual. Now, another way to know the voice of intuition, it knows itself to be one with all things. So it's not trying to separate itself. It's not trying to be better than. It's not trying to be less than. And excuse me. It knows that it is mutually engaged and interconnected with all things and is brilliantly so. So it is not limiting. It is not inferior. It is not superior. The other thing with intuition, the voice of intuition, it has no need. It has no expectation of outcome. It has no dependency or attachment to results. One of my favorite things about spirit when I'm working with people, when I'm working with clients and students, and the way spirit flows through me is that it never needs anybody to do anything. Spirit can come through with like the most amazingly loving guidance. And if the student I'm working with or client decides to be receptive to that and decides to take action on it or not, spirit has no attachment to it at all. And spirit will show up again and again and again with even more love and abundance for this person, whether or not they ever act on it. Ever. It's incessantly loving, incessantly detached from outcome, doesn't need any results, has no expectations. And I just love that. So also the voice of intuition, it knows infinite abundance. It is infinite abundance. It's dousing us with infinite abundance, incessantly, fluently, intact. It can never be diminished. It can never be limited. It can never even be defined. The moment you think you know it, it expands into something even more that is even more unfathomable. So also the voice of intuition is expansive out into the infinite cosmos. It has no desire to be limited or to have everything figured out. It's constantly curious in what else there is to learn and grow and experience. So this step number 3, just begin to have an awareness of and acknowledge the ego's voice and what the voice of intuition is.
I would actually like to add something to that, and then I will start wrapping up the conversation. Jamie, this is fascinating, and I believe these different characteristics, I will call them like that, that you were giving about the voice of the ego and the voice of intuition are very useful, and one can recognize times in the past that one or the other has appeared in these characteristics. What came to my mind to add to that, which I have experienced myself, I'm sure you've you've heard it also, is that when it comes, the voice comes from the ego, it has like a downwards motion or a heaviness to it, whereas when it is from the instinct, at least in my experience, it has a lightness, or it comes bubbling up. It's that's the best way I can describe it, but I'm just adding one more to the mix that you offered. I think this is incredibly useful, and as a tool every time on to guide in a way our decision process as well, because I think that will on its own is invaluable as a tool. Jamie, before I wrap this conversation up and ask you a couple of last quick fire questions, I wanted to ask you to share with the listener that has been fascinated by what you were saying. How can they get in contact with you, and what's the best place to find you?
Thanks so much, Augie. And let me just say, too, what you just said, your experience energetically of intuition versus ego, that upliftment and bubbling versus a heaviness and kind of a down pushing. I resonate with that, too. That's perfect. I feel you. So thanks for adding that in, because
it's my own personal experience. So
totally. I get that. And so everybody listening, our website, and Augie introduced, and I'm co-founder with my husband, Michael Thornhill, of Casa Galactica, a multidimensional center for healing and awakening in 𝘁𝗍𝗄𝗄, Peru, in the Sacred Valley. It's just beautiful here. You can see the mountains out the back window here. It's just stunning. Our website is CasaGalactica.com. And if you go to our website, that homepage, you can subscribe to our newsletter. When you do that, you'll receive a free beginner's handbook to strengthening your intuition, which builds off of the things I've spoke about today, the steps for strengthening your own intuition. And that's free. The other thing you'll receive as a subscriber, you'll receive access to Michael's Trauma Healing Foundations workshop, which is really awesome. He works incredibly, what I would say, kind of people experience when they work with him in his sessions, a somatic multidimensional awakening that heals the physical and spiritual aspects of trauma, and also awaken you to your own oneness and multidimensionality simultaneously. So there's a free trauma healing workshop that's also that you'll receive when you subscribe. And then you'll also receive 20% off a private session with Michael or I when you subscribe. So I would say that would be the first thing to go do, to go get some more freebies for any of you who are interested in sort of doing your own practice on your own. And then, of course, on that website, you'll see my intuitive reading sessions, which are just 60-minute online sessions that I work intuitively with you to bring through Spirit's guidance. And then my Intuitive Mentorship 101 course, which is also really awesome for anyone who is ready and willing and just on it to be able to strengthen their own recognition and working with their own intuition.
That's brilliant. Thank you. And I got two quick fire questions. So one sentence, if you can answer it, that would be great. Two at the most. And my first one is, what does personal development mean to you?
It feels like, for me, it's an inward seeking of personal truth as expressed through this incarnation.
Thank you. And a hypothetical one, if you could go back in time and meet the 18-year-old Jamie, what's one piece of advice you would give her?
Augie, it's interesting because I think I've actually done this. Sometimes I have an experience of what I call time travel, where my present day self goes back and speaks to my younger versions. And then I recognize that may have actually happened when I was that age. So I would say I would go back to my 18-year-old, and I think I've already done this, but I would whisper to her, be true to yourself. Be true to yourself.
Thank you. How beautiful advice. Jamie, I want to thank you very much for this conversation. I really enjoy it. I want to wish you all the very best with your and Michael's mission, and what you guys are doing there is wonderful. I want to wish you all the very best. Any last parting words from you?
I would just say to everybody, I'm just going to encourage you too. I'm going to whisper back to you in this present moment. Be true to yourself. You are lovingly brilliant, unique. You're an expression of the divine exactly as it's meant to be. You're perfect. In this moment, you have an opportunity to just allow that and honor that. Even if you forget in 30 seconds, just in this moment, take a second to honor your own divine, unique expression of the one. You're perfect. You're beautiful.
Thank you for listening, and I hope you got great value from today's episode. And if you'd be so kind, please take a moment to leave me an Apple Podcasts review, sharing how personal development mastery has made a difference to you today. Until next time, stand out, don't fit in,